what I'm going to be talking about is how to avoid having your SQLITE database completely erased when we're using the pandas.toSQL method and we return a blank list from an API call. This method comes from this Stack Overflow article right here. The guy asks, he wants to do an insert or ignore when taking an entire pandas data frame into a SQLITE database, and the response was consider using a temp table, and that's exactly what we're going to do. So let's go ahead and highlight the issue here. So what I've done is, instead of making a call to an API, I've just set up a dictionary with some basic data here. We've taken that data, moved it into a pandas data frame, and then moved it into a SQLITE database using the pandas.toSQL line item. And so let's just go ahead and look and see how that would look. So we're going to run this. It's created that database right there. And we see we've gotten the data in here, and it's great. And so now if we would come up here and let's say we ran it again to, we wanted to update the SQLITE database. Let's say we were running this every day, and for some reason we got a blank list up here. When we run this, we can see that that's completely deleted the existing data we have in that table. And ideally we would just want it to leave it alone and keep the data that we already had in there. The reason it's doing this is because of this parameter right here. It says if exists, and this can be a little misleading because you might think that if exists means if the row exists, but actually what it's referring to is if the table exists. And so when we come over here to the documentation and look at this, it says we have three options here. We can either choose if when we go to run this API again, right, the table's already going to exist, and so it's going to see that that table already exists. And so how do we want it to handle it? And we can have it fail, which is what we don't want, because then it's not going to update the data. We can have it append, which you would think would be what we're looking for, but what it's going to do is it's going to add the entire data set again. So if we had, so in this table we had 1-1, 1-2, and 1-3 as the dates. When it goes to append it, it's going to add the January 1st, January 2nd, January 3rd again, and we're going to have duplicate values in there. So we don't want that. And then it leaves us with replace, and what that does is it wipes away the entire data that existed and then replaces it with the data that it received. And so that's the issue, is when we have if we were to have a blank list returned from that API call, it would completely erase our table. And so none of those are good, and so that's what this method is going to avoid. So for our temp table here, we're going to leave if exists as replace, and our temp table is always going to have the data that we get back from the API call. Let me go ahead and add the data back, and then we're going to add a second table. And so how we're going to do that is we're going to come down here and we're going to do cursor.execute. I'm going to add a triple string quote here, and that's going to allow us to do this on multiple lines. So I'm going to come down here and say we're going to create the table if it does not exist. Otherwise, we're going to name the table, and so we're going to name this final table. And then we're going to enter in our columns. So we have those right up here. So I'm going to enter in date. That's going to be text. Number is going to be, I've got it set as text. It can be either or. Let's go ahead and just use text for the time being. And then we're going to do words, and that's going to be text. And then right here we're going to define a primary key. And so we're going to say primary key is going to be the date column. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow us to control when we have a duplicate value in that primary key column. So if we were to get two rows that had both January 1st of 2020 we're going to be able to tell it in the next line item how do you want it to handle that. Do you want it to ignore and keep that first row, or do you want it to override that first row with the second row? So we've gotten that in there. Then we're going to close off those parentheses, and then right below this we're going to close the triple string quote, and then one more parentheses, and that's going to do that one. And so then the next line item, we're going to say cursor.execute. Here we're going to define insert, and then this is how we want it to treat any duplicates on the primary key. And so, in this situation, ideally we don't want any duplicates up here. I'm going to say replace, because let's say something were to happen where the owners or whoever's putting the data into the API made an error and went and updated one of these numbers. I would want it to go ahead and replace that and update that value rather than ignore. So I'm going to say replace into, so where do we want the data to go to? We want it to go to the final table. We want it to be all rows, so we're going to say select star from, and then where is the data coming from? It's coming from the temp table. All right, and so that's going to be that row. So to recap what we've done, we've taken the data from the API, moved it into the temp table here. We've created a second SQLITE table, named this my final table. We've taken the data that we received from the API and moved it into the final table using an insert or replace. And now that we've gotten that data from the temp table to the final table, we're going to delete that temp table by going drop table, temp table. And then finally, we're going to close or save the connection and close it. All right, so let's go ahead and give this a run and see how it works. So I've run this, open the database, and we have our data in here, good deal. And now let's say we got a bad call from the API and it returned blank lists. We're going to run that. And I'm going to come over here and refresh this. We can see that data is still there in the table and it's protected it from the bad response. Additionally, it's given us the ability to define what happens when we have a duplicate value up here, or a change in the numbers. So let's say this ended up getting changed. In the prior API call it was 8 and it got updated to 10, right? We've told it here we want it to replace, we want it to follow those updates. So when we go to run this, it's going to update this value over here from 8 to 10. And there's the update. What I'm going to do is I'm going to comment out this drop of the temp table so that we can more easily see what's going on. And so let's go ahead and recreate this this bad API call. I'm going to run this. What we can see here is we have two tables, and this temp table is completely blank. And so this is the same table that we had where we were running into the issues of it deleting everything, right? But because we have this final table and we're using this one as like an intermediary rather than the final product, it's allowing us to preserve this data over here.